If you've been keeping an eye on public spending in Washington lately, you know the vibe in municipal and state offices isn't great. The state, municipal, and county governments under Democrat Party leadership are driving off the proverbial cliff.
From Seattle to Los Angeles, this is Left Coast News. No apologies, just the truth.
Earlier this month, Governor Bob Ferguson's Office of Financial Management dropped a massive reality check. They told state agencies to tighten their belts for a projected $4.3 billion structural deficit over the four-year outlook. Ferguson says he won't propose new taxes, but he strategically left the door open to signing them if the legislature passes them. The big question: can the state actually just cut its way out of a $4 billion hole? Realistically, it's a statistical nightmare. 70% of state budget goes to things they literally cannot legally or constitutionally touch, like public education or federal Medicare matches. Squeezing $4 billion out of the remaining 30% means gutting higher ed and rolling back new social programs. But if you think the state has it tough, look at our cities and counties. The fiscal rot isn't just in Olympia, it's hitting local governments hard. Let's head to City Hall. Seattle is staring down an absolute cliff. The newest estimates show the city is facing a staggering $488 million budget shortfall over the next 3 years. For next year alone, that's a $175 million deficit. Mayor Katie Wilson recently called the city's deficit completely structural. Translation: the city's everyday expenses are growing way faster than the cash coming in. Seattle filled its past gaps using progressive revenues, but the well is running dry. The local tech sector is cooled, the retail tax base is sluggish, and empty downtown office spaces aren't generating the property or business taxes they used to. So what's the play? Mayor Wilson is refusing to rule out new taxes. Right now, City Hall is quietly weighing options like a local capital gains tax or expanding the Jumpstart payroll tax. Critics are losing their minds, arguing that doubling down on taxes is exactly what's driving businesses and high-earning residents out of the city in the first place. But without new revenues, Seattleites could see noticeable pullbacks in non-emergency municipal services. And if you cross the city limits, the story doesn't get any better. King County itself is dealing with its own $150 million shortfall in its general fund, even after county leaders scrambled to authorize a new local sales tax to save basic public safety programs. They're still structurally underwater. Now, if you take a step back and look at who is steering the ship during this crisis, a very clear political pattern emerges. The state executive branch under Governor Ferguson, Democratic. The state legislature, Democratic majorities. Seattle City Hall and Mayor Wilson, deep blue. King County and Executive Gurmeet Zahale, firmly Democratic. Washington holds the nation's longest active streak of Democratic governors, having last elected a Republican to the executive office in 1980. Since the 2018 elections, Democrats have consistently held majorities in both the Washington State House of Representatives and the state Senate. Democrats currently hold all key state executive positions, including the Secretary of State, Attorney General, and Auditor, which Democrats have controlled continuously since 1933. The blame for where we are as a state squarely falls on the Democrat Party. When you look at the heaviest shortfalls, they are concentrated entirely in regions under long-term Democratic control. But as you move outward into the rest of the state, the politics shift, and so does the blame. In purple, Snohomish County, officials are wrestling with a $23.6 million biennial deficit alongside a $14 million year-over-year structural gap. Pierce County managed to balance its massive $3.5 billion 26 to 2027 biennial budget, but they had to use a combination of painful austerity and emergency tax measures to do it. So if you don't count taking money from its reserves. The county was staring down a severe structural deficit because its two main sources of revenue, property and sales tax, We're completely failing to keep pace with the hyperinflated costs of running a local government and honoring state-mandated salary increases. To patch the hole and prevent a full-blown budget collapse, Pierce County leaders had to deploy 3 emergency tactics. The budget relies heavily on a massive cash transfer from the county's rainy day savings to keep day-to-day operations running over the next 2 years. Pierce County is drawing down $385 million, 11% of the total budget, from its fund balances and reserves. What are they going to do the next time this comes around? Financial planners have already warned that while this keeps things stable through 2027, continuing to burn savings at this rate will drop county reserves dangerously below policy safety limits by 2029. The biggest chunk of the county deficit was eating directly into the general fund, specifically threatening core public safety and the justice system. To stop the bleed, the Pierce County Council pushed through a new 0.1% local sales tax increase to establish the Justice and Unified Safety Tax Fund. This tax pulls an estimated $20 million a year directly out of consumers' pockets to shore up the deficit. It faced significant public backlash from residents who pointed out that the county had just raised hundreds of other service fees, costing the average family an estimated $940 a year right before slapping them with a new tax. Even with the reserve drawdowns and the new sales tax revenue, Executive Ryan Mello had to bake strict cost containment measures directly into the budget framework to prevent the deficit from expanding. A strict general fund hiring freeze across the board, blocking departments from filling vacant civilian positions, hard restrictions on out-of-state county travel, and tightened vacancy savings, forcing departments to leave positions open as long as possible to skim the leftover salary cash to balance the books. While the county level used these stopgaps, the structural deficit is breaking through at local level within Pierce County. Tacoma Public Schools is suffering immensely, navigating a $10 million shortfall for the current school year, following a brutal $30 million deficit last year. They've been forced to slice over 21% of their administrative staff and make deep program cuts. The Tacoma Pierce County Health Department had to restructure its operations and hold a wave of positions vacant just to avoid laying off the equivalent of 40 full-time public health employees. Thurston County is absolutely in the thick of a massive structural budget crisis. When the county sat down to build its 2026 to 27 biennial budget, it was staring at a staggering $36 million general fund deficit. The crisis got so severe that county staff originally modeled a massive 26% across-the-board cut for departments to bridge the gap. That threat caused massive panic and high staff turnover as county employees feared for their jobs. After intense public pushback, including roughly 100 residents storming a commission meeting to protect the sheriff's office from a proposed $4.5 million cut, the Board of County Commissioners passed a final budget that whittled the immediate damage down, though it remains heavily underwater. The final cuts they settled on were $9.84 million in direct operational cuts. Every single department took a hit except for District Court and the Treasurer's Office. The law enforcement hit to Thurston County Sheriff's Office ultimately absorbed a $2.5 million cut, $1.24 million to law enforcement, $1.29 million to corrections. Sheriff Derek Sanders noted the cuts would be managed by eliminating 13 vacant jail positions, keeping active deputies on the street thanks only to separate voter-approved local public safety sales tax. The remainder deficit, even with those painful cuts, the county is still carrying an adopted 2026 deficit of roughly $11.9 million, forcing them to draw down their reserve fund balance as well below the board's safety policy. Austerity measures. In June 2026, the county implemented strict emergency protocols, including an ongoing general fund hiring freeze, a freeze on all county travel, and a vote by the county commissioners to freeze their own pay for a second consecutive year. County leadership has explicitly blamed skyrocketing costs for basic operational services and staff contracts, crashing directly into flat state and federal revenue streams. Just like its neighbors, Pierce County avoided an immediate operational cliff, but they had to drain their savings and raise local sales taxes just to keep the lights on. And out across the solid red county commissions of Eastern and Southwest Washington, local leaders are facing a sharpening labor market and soaring operational costs for things like county roads and jails. But their diagnosis of the problem is completely different. Conservative leaders argue the crisis is driven by runaway spending and state mandates passed down from Olympia. Yeah, no shit. Meanwhile, progressive leaders in King County and Seattle blame a regressive state tax structure that legally caps their local property tax growth to just 1% a year without a public vote. Can you imagine what our property taxes would be if that legal protection wasn't in place? Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Federal COVID relief. Back in 2021, the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, injected billions of temporary dollars directly into Washington state and local coffers. The rules were simple. Commit the money by 2024 and spend it completely by December 31st of 2026. It was explicitly labeled as one-time emergency relief. It was never meant to be permanent funding. So why are we talking about it in 2026 as a reason for a budget collapse? Because local governments, Democrats, use that temporary windfall to build permanent houses in places like Seattle and King County. Leaders used ARPA cash to spin up or heavily expand ongoing programs, homeless shelters, mental health networks, and expanded public health staffing. When the pandemic emergency ended, those social needs didn't vanish, and the programs developed dependent constituencies of voters and advocacy groups. Cutting them became politically toxic. Worse, many cities played a fiscal shell game. They used federal money to cover up standard ongoing operations like police salaries under the guise of revenue replacement. That freed up local tax dollars, which councils immediately spent on new permanent programs and historic union contracts with locked-in wage increases. Local leaders gambled that by the time the federal money expired at the end of 2026, the local economy would have boomed enough to absorb all these new baseline costs. Instead, the exact opposite happened. Inflation skyrocketed, the cost of paving roads and paying staff, the tech sector cooled, and the clock on that federal cushion just officially ran out. From Governor Ferguson's office down to your local county council, Washington leaders, the vast majority Democrats, are stuck in a classic fiscal pincer movement. They built a permanent budget on a temporary foundation, and now they are out of easy options. Whether it's deep budget cuts that trigger local outcry or brand new taxes that risk driving more wealth out of the state the next few months in Olympia, municipalities and county governments are going to be brutal. So here's where this leaves us. Washington's budget problems didn't appear overnight, and they won't disappear overnight either. State government, counties, and cities across Washington are all making difficult decisions because the cost of government has continued to rise faster than the revenue coming in. The debate now is simple. Do we continue expanding government and ask taxpayers to cover the difference? Or do we finally have an honest conversation about priorities, spending, and what government can realistically afford? One thing is certain, temporary money is gone. Reserve funds aren't unlimited, and taxes eventually reach a point where people and businesses change their behavior. Eventually, the math wins. Over the next several months, pay close attention to what your local city council, county commissioners, and legislatures are proposing. Watch where they're cutting, watch where they're spending, and most importantly, watch who they're asking to pay for it. Because at the end of the day, government doesn't create wealth, it spends yours. If you found this breakdown valuable, help get it in front of more people by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and sharing this video with someone who wants to understand what's really happening in Washington state. Washington is facing a multi-billion-dollar budget shortfall at the state, county, and city level. What do you think is the solution? Cut government spending, raise taxes, eliminate programs, reform the tax system, or something else? If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person we built this for. This channel exists to cut through the noise and give you real, unfiltered analysis on what's happening across the West Coast. Follow and subscribe to us on all platforms: YouTube, Rumble, Brighteon, BitChute, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Please share this episode so people are aware of what's going on and what to watch for come November and the next legislative session. Thanks for watching.